Chapter 22 Fun. In a faraway place. Kaya. There was a voice of a woman who seemed to be frightened by something. In a forest there was a woman running from something. Please, said the woman who asked for help. The woman kept running from something. Occasionally she looked back to see the creature that was chasing her. Grr. There was a sound from the creature chasing her. The woman continued to run while asking for help, but no one came to help her. The woman then began to fatigue from continuing to run from earlier being chased by the creature. Huffed, I'm tired, said the woman who seemed to have run out of stamina. The creature then began to approach the woman from behind. The woman was now completely exhausted and could not run anymore. The woman then looked back to see the creature, and it turned out that the creature was the monster that chased after her. Do not come close, the woman shouted, now completely scared. Looks like the monster is not alone. The monster has many friends behind it and seems to be preparing to attack the poor girl. Don't come near, the woman shouted. The monster still approached the woman who seemed to have no hope of running away. She hoped that there would be someone who would help her, but it seemed that it would not be possible because she was in a forest far enough from the settlement. No, said the woman, crying in fear. The monster then lunged. The woman intended to attack her. The woman also seemed to have surrendered while covering her eyes with her arms while crying. Crush. Without the thought of the woman who seemed to have accepted her fate, suddenly there was a direct arrow on the head of the monster, who did not seem to think that someone would help her. The woman was shocked because she did not expect that she would survive the attack of a monster who would eat her. The woman then saw who had helped her. Are you okay? The woman saw a woman carrying an arrow. The woman was shocked to find out who the woman really was. The woman dressed in green, white hair and green eyes. Miss Artemis, said the woman, shocked to see Artemis. Artemis just smiled, seeing the woman seemed to feel safe because of her arrival. Artemis then looked at the monsters, who seemed scared because Artemis had managed to kill one of his friends. Hurry to hide, ordered Artemis to the woman. The woman then ran to find a hiding place. The monster then looked at Artemis, who seemed ready to eliminate them. I hate creatures who only attack women, said Artemis, who then drew one of her arrows to one of the monsters. One of the monsters was then hit by an arrow from Artemis and immediately died. Artemis then saw one of the monster friends who would attack her. Artemis stopped directly to the side. Don't expect too much, monster, said Artemis, mocking the monster. Artemis then uses her other arrows and her archery, so the monster also immediately laid helplessly. Artemis then looked at the remaining monsters. Do you want to join your friends? Sneered Artemis. The monster was just snarling at Artemis's mockery. The monsters then fled. Artemis seized them with cynical stares as they all turn out to be cowards. Sis cowardly cube. Artemis then looked into the forest to find the woman. Hey, come out. It's safe, shouted Artemis, telling the woman to get out of her hiding place. The woman then came out from behind the large rocks while looking at Artemis happily for saving her. Miss Artemis, are you okay? Asked the woman. I'm fine, said Artemis with a smile. The woman then arrived in front of Artemis, smiling because Artemis had helped her. Artemis then looked at the corpses of the monsters that had been killed. How can you be attacked by the monsters? Asked Artemis, pointing to the corpses of the monsters she had killed. I don't know. When I went into the forest to look for medicinal plants, I was suddenly attacked by monsters. Even though the forest near the village should be very rarely found by monsters, said the woman. So yes. Artemis then thought about the monster. Lately the monsters had attacked several residents near the village. Are you hurt? Asked Artemis. The woman then looked confused when asked by Artemis. Artemis then looked at his arm that seemed to be hurt. Artemis sighed. You don't need to be nervous like that to ask for the help of goddess like me, said Artemis. The woman just smiled shyly because she was so nervous when in front of a goddess, because it was very rare for someone to meet a goddess. Known as Artemis. When Artemis chatted with the woman, a voice called Artemis. Artemis then saw the origin of the voice. It turned out that the huntress then called it. Is Miss Artemis all right? Asked one of the huntress. I'm fine, replied Artemis. Quickly take the woman to the camp and treat her, told Artemis to the huntresses. Good lady, said huntress, obeying Artemis. Come on, take huntress to a woman who has been saved by Artemis. The woman then went with the huntress to their camp. Artemis still thought about the monsters that were getting fiercer lately. Is there anything that makes them like that? Artemis then planned to tell this to Olympus. I'd better report this, said Artemis. Artemis then went to the hunters to camp and then reported this to Olympus. Artemis also hoped that this was not a big problem. Ano's house. Now we are in a house that must be known. Where the house is the home of our hero even though he doesn't want to be called a hero. In the room there was Luffy who seemed to be sleeping with a blanket covering his body and Luffy seemed to sleep soundly. Luffy felt tired once a night because he had to fight with one of the noble devils. Luffy then wakes up because he feels satisfied with his long sleep. Luffy is used to waking up every morning because Ayano always wakes him up. Home. Luffy yawns. It's early morning. Luffy then looks at his room to remember last night that was so extraordinary for Luffy. Luffy remembers that he saved Rias from a wedding and they flew using a strange bird and returned home using Rias' teleport magic. Wait, is that a bird or a lion? Luffy then confuses the creature. Luffy then didn't realize that there was someone in the blanket, then Luffy was curious to see someone in the blanket. Luffy then opened the blanket to see who was in the blanket. Rias said Luffy when he saw who was in the blanket. Looks like Rias is sleeping soundly but Luffy realizes that Rias doesn't wear any clothes that cover her body. Rias then awakens from her sleep and then immediately puts up a sitting position. Good morning Luffy-kun, Rias said while rubbing her eyes and then saw Luffy staring at her neutral. Good morning Rias said Luffy with a smile. Rias looks at Luffy with a sweet smile because she remembered last night where Luffy bravely faced Razor who was mentioned as one of the noble devils. Rias then felt that she had to ask Luffy about who he really was. Luffy called Rias. What's up Rias? Asked Luffy. Who are you actually? Rias asked with curiosity. I'm Monkey D. Luffy, Luffy said. Rias just smiles when Luffy knows her even though Rias already knows that she already knows his name. I know your name is Luffy but what I mean is who are you really? Rias asked again. Luffy then thinks about how to explain this to Rias. Luffy feels dizzy if he has to explain the world of pirates and the new world. In fact, before Luffy finished his words, Luffy then smelled a very delicious smell. This smell makes Luffy feel excited. Food, Luffy shouted. Luffy then rose from the bed and then ran down to the kitchen where the smell came from. Rias just stares at the exit that Luffy broke with a puzzled look. Luffy was running on the stairs toward the kitchen. Luffy then turned eagerly towards the kitchen. Luffy then arrived in front of the kitchen that was preparing to go inside. Food, Luffy shouted and went inside. Rainer, Midelt and Kalauerner were surprised to hear Luffy's voice, then they were happy to hear Luffy's voice as well as Ayano who was cooking something. Kalauerner, Rainer and Midelt then turn around to see Luffy. Good morning Luffy say. Before they finish their words, they are shocked when they turn around. Rainer looks and the two fallen angels are wearing shocked faces and then their faces turn red. Good morning Luffy. Ayano was immediately shocked when she turned to see Luffy staring at them with a puzzled look. Ayano then covered her face when she saw Luffy, making Luffy even more confused. What's wrong with you? Asked Luffy. Master Luffy, you, Midelt tried to explain. No, that's, Rainer also seemed to want to tell. What is wrong? Asked Luffy more confused. Luffy, where? Ayano also seemed to be troubled when explaining something. Luffy was annoyed with his four friends. They tried to tell him but there seemed to be something that made them unable to speak normally. What's the matter with you guys? Asked Luffy. Luffy, you're nude. Ayano then shouted at Luffy as she pointed at Luffy. Luffy then wonders with Ayano's words. Luffy then sees himself to confirm his body and that is true. Luffy doesn't use anything to cover his body. Wow, I'm naked, Luffy said calmly. Bang. Luffy then felt that his head had been hit by something very hard that made Luffy fall backwards. Get some clothing, Ayano shouted with anger, ashamed. Luffy then lay helpless when a pan hit his head. Luffy then fainted. All the people in the kitchen were confused with Luffy. Was that too much Ayano? Said Midelt seeing Luffy fainted. Ayano just put on a face of confusion and worry when she saw Luffy who seemed to faint. Luffy. Ayano and the others then heard a voice. The voice was familiar to Ayano because it seemed like Ayano recognized the voice. Luffy, are you okay? Looks like Rias is holding Luffy's body for what seems to be unconscious, seen from Luffy's swirling eyes. Gremory-san? Ayano was shocked to see Rias at her house as well as the three angels falling there. The three fallen angels then realized that Rias was a devil and then they were preparing to turn into their fallen angel mode. What are you doing here? Ayano continued when she saw Rias. Riaz then saw Ayano, who seemed to be confused with this incident, then woke up with a smile coloring her lips. Ayano looked at Riaz more confused. "Well, I'll explain," said Riaz with a smile. Ayano then saw Riaz's body that didn't use anything to cover, so it revealed her large body and breasts. "I'll explain everything." Unnoticed by Riaz, there was a pot flung towards her and then hit her head, and Riaz immediately fainted next to Luffy. "Get some clothes," Ayano shouted with anger. Rainer and others stared at Ayano with fear, while Ayano seemed furiously mixed with irritation. "In this house it is forbidden to do pervert things," Ayano shouted. Ayano's cry was so loud that neighbors heard the sound. Skip time. Scene now. Luffy and Riaz are sitting at the dining table after wearing cow's school clothes neatly. Luffy was eating Ayano's food while Riaz was talking to Ayano and the others. "So Luffy defeated the noble devil," said Ayano. "Right, Razor lost against Luffy," said Riaz, admiring Luffy's strength. "It looks like the devil's demon feels the consequence of his arrogance," said Rainer. "Were you not also arrogant when we first met?" Rainer said Luffy, who was stopping his eating activities. Rainer was just as shy about hearing the correct Luffy word. Rainer was also arrogant when she first met Luffy because Luffy was a human. "And your fate is also the same as the noble devil," leaning Ayano casually. Rainer looked at Ayano with a frown, while Riaz just laughed at them. Riaz then looks at Luffy as she continues her food quickly. "So you are from the Gremory family?" asked Kalauerner. Rainer then looked at Riaz, who used to look like she really wanted to kill her and Midelt, but because Luffy felt comfortable with this person, then Rainer just accepted resignedly. "Aren't you the ones who captured Asia in the church?" Riaz just realized. The three fallen angels only stared at Riaz with a sharp look. Ayano realized this then and confused because there would be a battle between the fallen angels and the devil in her house. "Luffy, do something," Ayano said to Luffy, who was enjoying his food. Luffy then saw Riaz and the three fallen angels, who were staring at each other sharply. Luffy then thought that they could get along. Riaz is still staring at Rainer and her friends with a sharp look because of Asia, while Rainer stares at Riaz sharply for hurting Midelt. "Hey guys, see this?" Riaz, Ayano and the others then looked at Luffy, who had called them, as Luffy was making something with his food. Luffy is making a snowman with rice, even though the ingredients are rice, but it is very visible with a real snowman. "Look at this, it's cool, right?" said Luffy proudly. Bang! There was the sound of a clash between Luffy's head and an iron bar. The beating was Ayano. "Do not play with food," Ayano said with anger. "Sorry," said Luffy while holding his head, which was a bump from the blow from Ayano. Riaz and the three fallen angels then burst out laughing at Luffy's ridiculous behavior. Luffy then smiled happily because they finally got along and now they laughed together. Ayano was aware of what Luffy was doing. Ayano didn't think that Luffy would do this, so Riaz and the fallen angels would stop staring at each other like they wanted to fight. Riaz then stopped from laughing. "So do you guys know the real Luffy?" asked Riaz to Ayano and the rest. Ayano and the other then smiled at Riaz's question. Ayano then explained about the real Luffy, starting from little Luffy, meeting Shanks, being a pirate, about the world government, about devil fruit, about hockey and about the world nobility. Riaz was shocked when he heard Ayano's story. First he did not believe, but he began to believe what Ayano was saying. "It's like Gremory-san, I understand if you don't believe what I said, but this is the truth about Luffy," said Ayano. Riaz then thinks of the real Luffy. He first doesn't believe, but then he starts to calm down and starts to trust everything. "So Luffy is a dangerous pirate," said Riaz. "Right, he is one of the most dangerous pirates in his world," Ayano answered. "And about this devil fruit, I don't really understand, but they are quite interesting," said Riaz curiously. "I see, we also think like that," said Ayano, agreeing with Riaz. Riaz then thought about telling this to her brother because this would be very interesting for devils in the underworld, especially the Maou. "Thank you, Ayano, for telling everything," said Riaz, grateful. Ayano just smiled when Riaz thanked her. It made Ayano feel close to Riaz. "Ayano, don't you have to go to school?" asked Midelt. Ayano was surprised because when she was going to go to school, Ayano then looked at Riaz and Riaz nodded understanding. Riaz then pulls Luffy. "Wait a minute, Luffy had not finished his food." "Later, you can continue your meal in the cafeteria," Riaz said while pulling Luffy. "No," Luffy said to his food. "In school." Luffy and the others arrived at school by running very fast. Luffy didn't feel the impact of exhaustion as well as Rias, but not for Ayano, who was an ordinary human. Ayano is now gasping due to running fatigue. Ayano then feels she is just an ordinary human being here. Am I the only ordinary person here? Ayano said irritably because she was the only one exhausted. I'm a human, said Luffy. Ayano then glared at Luffy. You're not an ordinary man, Luffy, Ayano said with a frown. I think so too, she said Luffy with a laugh. Ayano just stared at Luffy with a scowl of Luffy's character. Rias just laughed to see the interaction between Luffy and Ayano. I didn't know that Ayano is so concerned about you, Luffy-kun, said Rias with a smile. Ayano then saw Rias frowning and then smiled. Ayano felt proud what she told Luffy. Of course, I am the one who keeps him fed all the time, said Ayano proudly. Rias heard Ayano and was startled because she didn't know why Ayano was so arrogant when she bragged about Luffy. Oh really? Rias then smiled, feeling attracted by Ayano's temptation. Yes, I'm bathing him, giving him a meal, and preparing him every day, Ayano said proudly. Oh, I think the limit of your relationship with Luffy is limited to brother and sister, said Rias with a smile. Ayano is surprised by Ria's words. It is true that her relationship with Luffy is limited to sister and brother. It's true, Ayano said resignedly. So I still have the chance to be Luffy's wife, Ria said bluntly. Amazon Lily. I feel a disturbance with my heart, said Boa Hancock. What's wrong, sister? Shouted Sonia. I don't know, but I feel the need to murder someone in a faraway land, said Boa irritably. Could this be about Luffy? Boa wondered. Back to current world. Ayano then felt that her heart would explode when Rias told her that she would become Luffy's wife. Ayano was troubled by Ria's outspoken words. I don't think that will happen, said Ayano firmly. Dressing then surprised also with the word Ayano, who suddenly refused Rias to become Luffy's wife. So what? Rias asked. Because I'm in charge of Luffy, so Luffy does not have to have a wife, said Ayano with confidence. Make a confusion with Ayano's words. Damn, I was provoked, said Ayano in her heart. If that just doesn't seem to be enough, Luffy also needs the name of an actual wife's job, said Rias, tempting Ayano. Ayano then was shocked by Rias's words. Ayano then understood what Rias meant. You mean you are? Ayano then started flushing. Rias smiles, seeing Ayano's face that is blushing clearly. Luffy sees Ayano just confused because she doesn't understand what Rias and Ayano are talking about. What are you talking about? Asked Luffy. We are talking about you, Luffy-kun, Rias said. Luffy was just confused by Rias's words. Luffy then saw Ayano, who had been seen from the red face. What's wrong with you, Ayano? Asked Luffy. Oh, I'm fine, Luffy, Ayano said, trying to hide her embarrassed expression. We should go to class, Luffy said. You are right. Ayano then left Luffy and Rias with a still flushed face. Luffy was just confused by the sudden Ayano's attitude. What about her? Luffy asked Rias. I don't know, but it seems like he's thinking about something important, said Rias with a smile. Luffy then just nods with Rias. Luffy thinks that Ayano is a busy person because he often helps him, so Luffy thinks this time he will help Ayano. We'd better go to class too, Luffy, Rias said. Oh, you're right. Luffy and Rias then go to their class. Luffy and Rias are on their way to their class. Luffy looks eager to meet Akino and the others. When they were on their way, they met Katace and Murayama. Luffy who saw them and greeted them. Hey Katace, Murayama, Luffy told them. Katace and Murayama then heard Luffy's cry. They then saw Luffy. Katace and Murayama then feel annoyed as Luffy calls them, plus Luffy seems to be walking towards them. Hey, how are you guys? Asked Luffy. Katace and Murayama just kept quiet and didn't answer Luffy. They looked at Luffy with an annoyed look. Why did you call us? Murayama asked irritably. So what? Asked Luffy confused. Listen, we don't like you and we hate the pervert like you, Katace said firmly. Is it true? Katace and Murayama did not realize that there was someone behind them. Murayama then turned to see who was speaking. Eika-san. It turned out that Eika was the one who was speaking behind them. Eika just smiled at Katace and Murayama was shocked. Eika then saw Luffy. Hello Mujiwara, when Sappa time. Hey Eika, whoever Luffy goes back. Eika just smiled when Luffy responded to her greeting. Katace and Murayama then began to get annoyed because they were ignored by Luffy. Don't ignore us, they shouted angrily. Luffy was just confused with them. They were angry because they greeted them, now they looked angry because Luffy didn't talk to them. Why are you angry? Asked Luffy. Because you ignored us, they both said angrily. Aka just laughed at Murayama and Katace, who was angry when Luffy looked confused. What is this? Rias then comes to the four of them, Katace and Murayama, and is shocked by Luffy with Rias. Rias-sama, said the two of them in surprise. Oh, you guys, said Rias, looking at Katace and Murayama. What are you doing? Katace asked. What are you doing? Of course I'm in school, answered Rias. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, why are you with this pervert? Katace said, pointing at Luffy. Luffy, who was pointed by Katace, just stared at her neutral without any emotion. Rias looked shocked when Katace called Luffy with a nasty call. Pervert? Rias asked. He is a pervert in this school, Katace said. Right, he is a very dangerous person. You should stay away from him, continued Murayama. Rias then looks at Luffy, who seems confused by the words from Katace and Murayama, then smiles. Relax, he's not a pervert, Rias said, trying to convince Katace and Murayama. That's right, Aka agreed with Rias, you're the ones who are perverted, continued Aka. Katace and Murayama are shocked by Rias and Aka's words for supporting Luffy, plus Aka instead accuses them of being perverted. What do you mean, Aka-san? Said Katace, who looked angry but actually shy. Is my word correct? Aka said with a smile. The two of them couldn't say a word anymore. Katace and Murayama then saw Luffy with a shy red face. Look out, we'll get you. Luffy is just confused with the words Katace and Murayama. Murayama and Katace then goes running to their class with embarrassment. Luffy just stared at them in confusion because he didn't know what really happened. Actually, why are they? Asked Luffy, confused. Rias smiled at Katace and Murayama, who were so embarrassed when they heard Aka's words. Aka then looked at Rias, who seemed happy. So are you happy, Rias-chan? Said Aka. Rias then just put on a smile on Aka. Aka then held her glasses while looking at Rias. Wow, it seems like your breasts are getting bigger, said Aka while looking at Rias's breasts. The dress was shocked by Aka's words, then smiled and at Aka. Yes, that's how it is, but why are your breasts always small? Rias sneered. Aka just smiled at Rias's words about her breasts. Luffy just looked at them in confusion. Don't we have to go to class? Said Luffy. Rias and Aka then realized that Luffy is right. This is when he entered the class. Then see you, Rias-chan, Mujiwara-kun. Aka then left Luffy and Rias. Luffy and Rias just saw Aka go to her class. Come on, Luffy, Rias invited. Luffy followed Rias from behind to their class. Luffy and Rias did not know that anyone was watching them from behind. Skip time. Luffy and Rias are now heading to their club after the learning hours are over. Luffy follows Rias from behind. I can't wait to see Akino and the others, said Luffy. Rias then smiles when she hears Luffy. The peerage might be wondering who Luffy really is. Yes, they're also really looking forward to seeing you, Luffy, said Rias. Luffy just smiled because he thought that Akino and others were curious about his strength. Rias and Luffy arrived at the Magic Research Club building. Rias and Luffy then went straight into the building without knocking. They then arrived in front of the living room. Rias then knocked on the door to tell them they had arrived. The door is then opened by Akino. Arabucho and Luffy look like they, said Akino, looking at Rias and Luffy. Hey Akino, said Luffy. Bucho, I want to tell you something, said Akino. Rias then wonders about Akino. Tell what? Asked Rias. Today we are coming guests, said Akino. Guest? Rias is confused because it's very rare for them to have a guest at their club. All right, I'll see who the guest is. Akino then lets Rias and Luffy go inside. Inside, Rias can see all the members of the peerage. But Rias also realized that there were two strangers inside. The two men wore a black robe covering their bodies, so Rias could not identify who the two were. So you are Rias Gremory, huh? Said one of the people. Right, Rias answered with a smile. We have to talk about something important, said the person. Rias and the peerage just stared at the strangers with curious looks while Luffy looked confused at the two people. Who are they? Asked Luffy. X. In a far place. In the far place where there was a place that was so devastated as if there was a fight, there was a woman who was facing several soldiers. But it seems that most of the soldiers have lost a lot. You are too fast to face me, said the woman. Sid did not expect the dragon goddess to be so strong, said one of the soldiers. Should we retreat, Master Rex? Asked one of the remaining soldiers. Looks like we have to retreat first, said Rex, holding his injured stomach. All right, the soldiers then issued a teleport magic. Tiamat just stared at them with a neutral look. Rex didn't know that Tiamat was very strong. Just watch out for you, Tiamat, Rex said as he disappeared using teleport magic with the remaining soldiers. Tiamat just stared at them with a condescending look. He was very annoyed when faced with people who were so arrogant when they had lost. You are lowly creatures, said Tiamat. Tiamat then flew into space with his dragon wings towards his castle, but Tiamat did not realize that someone saw his battle with the Rex warriors. He is really strong, said the person. I have to report this. That person then left with his teleported magic power back to where he was. Chapter 23, Holy Sword? So can you tell me who you are? Riaz asked. Riaz was sitting in front of the two strangers. The two strangers just looked at Riaz with a sharp look. We are a shipment from the Central Church, said the stranger. Riaz just nodded understanding while staring at the two women casually. Luffy saw the two people just felt curious. Coupled with their mysterious clothes, Luffy was curious. So you are sent from the church? Said Riaz. Right, replied one of the people. So what does the church need with me? Riaz asked. We want to talk to you. Riaz is increasingly curious about these two mysterious people. Why does this person want to talk to him? Plus they are church people, so it is impossible to talk to ordinary things with him. Speaking of what? Speaking of important things, namely a sword, said the stranger. A sword? Right, this sword is not an ordinary sword. This sword is one of the holy swords, said the two women. Holy sword, Luffy was surprised. The holy sword is a sword that has holy power, so that the sword is very strong. With that holy power they use holy swords to fight the devil, so that the sword is very dangerous for devils, said Akino, telling Luffy. Luffy only nodded understanding. So this sword is very strong. Luffy also thought whether Zoro would be interested in this holy sword. Kiba looked quite shocked when he heard the word holy sword. The holy sword should be used against Satan, but there are those who use it with no responsibility. Not responsible? Yes, there are rumors saying that there is a church here that is trying to awaken the holy sword in this city. We are trying to stop that. So what's the connection with me? Riaz asked directly to the point. We hope that you don't disturb our affairs. Riaz then was surprised by the words of the person in front of her. Riaz didn't know what to say. These two people don't seem to have a specific purpose, they just say that they can't be disturbed. Well, I understand, said Riaz. Good. The two women then stood up to leave the occult research room. They then went to the exit, but when they came to the exit, one of the women then looked at Asia. What is wrong? Asia asked nervously because she was seen. So you are a nun who is raised into a devil, said the person. Yes, replied Asia. Disgusting. Asia is shocked to hear the words of the person who insults her. Asia then looks sad and confused to explain this situation, but she is too nervous. Asia can't say anything. Do you want to protest? Said the woman looking at Asia. Hey, don't disturb Asia, Issei suddenly shouted at the person. The mysterious person then saw Issei, who seemed angry. Luffy also looked angry at that person for ridiculing Asia, his friend. He really doesn't mean that his friends are ridiculed by others. Why, she is still a devil. Someone nun becomes a devil is an insult, continued the person. Don't taunt Asia. Issei was still angry at the two people. The two women only stared at Issei neutral. Luffy looked at the two women angrily. So you still don't accept my words? Of course not, Issei shouted. Hey, Luffy then called the two men. Don't insult Asia, continued Luffy, upset. The two men then saw Luffy, who was now really annoyed. Luffy then stared at the two women sharply. Then it's fine, said the person. Luffy and Issei are confused by the words of one of the people. The person then sees Luffy and Issei. If you don't accept my words to her, then we will fight to determine whether my words are wrong or not, said the person. Luffy and Issei just stared at the two of them. Luffy seemed to agree with this while Issei also agreed. Well, we will fight outside. The person then go out with his friend. Riaz sees them leave, just relieved because there won't be a big problem. Riaz then looks at Luffy, who doesn't seem to like the person's words. Luffy. Riaz then calls Luffy. Luffy then sees Riaz, who is calling her. Are you really going to fight? Riaz asked. Of course, she insulted Asia. I will not let my friend be insulted, said Luffy firmly. Asia looks at Luffy with surprise because he supports her. Asia does not think that there are still people who will support her. Thank you, Luffy. Luffy then looked towards Asia, seeing Asia a little tear in her eyes. Luffy smiled towards Asia. Okay, I'll beat them, Luffy shouted. Well, be careful of the two of you, said Rias to Luffy and Issei. Okay, Butcho, said Issei. Outside. Now it looks like Luffy and Issei are preparing to fight the two mysterious people. The two mysterious women stare at Issei and Luffy calmly. Let's start. Rias and the other peerages are worried about Luffy and Issei's safety. Luffy just smiled, smiling impatiently to fight, while Issei seemed to be putting on a fighting pose. The two mysterious women then opened their robes to show Rias and the others. It was seen on the right was seen a blue-haired woman wearing a black shirt, while the woman next to her also wears the same shirt, but the woman has yellow hair tied with twin ponytails. Everyone saw the two strangers reveal themselves, then shocked except Issei, who was wearing his perverted face, saw the two foreign girls. One of the strangers then uttered something from her back. There was a large object covered by a very large bandage. Luffy saw that the object was just confused. What is that? Asked Luffy. You will soon find out. The stranger then opened the bandage on the object so that the object then revealed itself to Luffy and the others. That, Rias looked shocked at the thing. So are the other peerages, especially Kiba. A sword? Luffy saw that it was a fairly large sword. Right, this is one of the holy swords, explained the foreign woman. Holy sword, cool. Luffy shouted happily at seeing one of the holy swords. The two foreign women were puzzled by the attitude of Luffy, who had been angry, now happy to see her sword. Rias and the others just smiled to see Luffy's usual attitude, as easily amazed by the cool sword. Well, we will introduce our name. My name is Zenovia Quarta, Zenovia said, introducing herself. Zenova? Luffy seems troubled to mention Zenovia's name. Zenovia. Zenovia shouted irritably. Oh, I'll just call you Zenov, said Luffy innocently. Rias's peerage just sweat drop when they hear Luffy saying the name of the person as he likes. Rias laughs to see Luffy calling Zenovia with Zenov. Zenovia feels even more upset with the person in front of her. Don't just fool around, said Zenovia angrily. Ha 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 ha, Zenov? That's funny. Laughed the person next to Zenovia. Shut up, Irina. Zenovia shouted to a friend next to her. Sorry, said Irina. Well, now it's my turn to introduce myself. My name is Irina Shidao. Irina. Issei looked surprised because he knew the name. Oh, Issei, how are you? Irina shouted to Issei. Everyone then looked at Issei, who seemed confused. Luffy saw Issei confused and asked him. You know her, Issei? Asked Luffy. Yes, it seems like I know her, said Issei, trying to remember Irina. Issei kept trying to remember Irina, but it seemed like he was having a hard time remembering it. Irina was upset because Issei didn't remember it. Don't you remember me, Issei? Irina shouted irritably. Issei then starts to get scared because she suddenly gets angry. I'm sorry, said Issei, trying to apologize. Well, I'll remind you, Irina said with a smile, preparing to fight. Issei and Luffy are preparing to fight with the two women in front of them. Zenovia then ran towards Luffy, who seemed to be getting ready. Be careful, Luffy, Rias said worriedly to Luffy. Zenovia then launches her attack towards Luffy, but Luffy easily avoids the attack. Zenovia then slashed her sword horizontally very quickly. Luffy was shocked because Zenovia suddenly replaced her attack quickly. Luffy then managed to avoid the attack from Zenovia by using his observation. Phew, almost, said Luffy. Zenovia then smiles when Luffy manages to avoid her attack. Luffy then thinks that the woman in front of him is very strong. On the other side, Issei was facing Irina. Okay, I'll beat you. Issei then took out her gauntlet to fight Irina. Irina then smiled when Issei took out his sacred gear. Irina then took out a sword. So you also use the sword, said Issei, looking at Irina. Right, you should be careful, Irina said sweetly. Irina then attacked Issei. Issei then realized that Irina would slash, with Issei's quick reaction avoiding the attack. Be careful, Issei, she also has a holy sword. If she slashes you, you will immediately die, said Rias, realizing that Irina also seemed to have a holy sword. What? Issei said in surprise and began to fear. Holy sword again? Where? Luffy then wondered about another holy sword. Do not be careless. Zenobia then attacked Luffy using her sword. Luffy then dodges the attack from Zenobia by jumping aside. Zenobia doesn't stop attacking Luffy anymore. "Be careful, Luffy, don't be careless," said Rias. "He almost got hit," Akino said, seeing Luffy off guard. "Basic stupid," Kaneko said to Luffy with a flat face. Issei looked troubled against Irina, who was so agile when launching her attack. Irina with a sweet smile continued to attack Issei. "Damn," said Issei. "Just calm down, Issei, I'll immediately purify you," said Irina with a sweet smile. "What purify? You tried to kill me," shouted Issei angrily mixed with fear. Rias and the peerages continue to watch the battle seriously. The opponents of both of them are people who carry holy swords. Just a little slash to a devil will be fatal as a result. Luffy continues to avoid Zenovia's attack quickly. Zenovia continues to attack Luffy blindly without giving Luffy time to rest. Then Luffy jumped back with enough to fall. "It turns out you have a great reactions," said Zenovia to Luffy. "You also turned out to be strong too, Shishishi," Luffy said to Zenovia with a laugh. Issei continued to avoid the attack from Irina, who wanted to slash him. Issei then tried to move away from Irina. "Are you crazy?" Issei shouted angrily. Issei is now feeling about being able to rest while looking at Irina, who is smiling at him. "Oh Issei, why did you become a devil? Even though we are friends," said Irina, who seemed to be sad. "Don't be sad," Issei growled. Luffy now sees Zenovia, who seems to be exhausted from continuing to lift her large sword. "Are you tired?" asked Luffy. Zenovia just kept quiet when asked by Luffy. Luffy looked at Zenovia and stood upright, looking at him with a sharp look. "You are indeed a powerful devil," said Zenovia. "Yes, I'm actually a hum." "Correct, he is my strong servant." Rias suddenly cuts Luffy's words. Luffy is shocked when Rias cuts his words and immediately says that he is a devil. "Hey Rias, I am." "Shut up, Luffy," Rias suddenly shouted at Luffy. Luffy then fell silent in fear of seeing Rias's eyes stare sharply. Rias was telling Luffy to be quiet. "Oh yeah, you must be happy to have a strong devil." Zenovia then raised her sword like she was tired to fight. "I think it's enough." Luffy is confused by Zenovia's words. Luffy looks at Zenovia, who seems to have no intention of fighting anymore. "Don't you want to fight again?" asked Luffy. "No, I now understand why you are so angry when I insult the former nun," said Zenovia, smiling at Luffy. "Irina, let's go back," said Zenovia, telling Irina. "What? But I'm playing with Issei-kun coolly," said Irina. "Playing? You tried to kill me," said Issei, who looked exhausted from avoiding the attack from Irina. "Never mind, we have to do our job," said Zenovia. "Oh well." Irina then looked at Issei. "Samape, meet Issei-kun," said Irina sweetly. Issei just looked at Irina with an annoyed face because she still behaved sweetly to him even though she wanted to intend to kill him. Zenovia then looked at Rias, who was still smiling at the outcome of the fight. "Remember your promise," said Zenovia. "Relax, I'm from the Gremory family, always keeping promises," said Rias proudly. Zenovia then repackets her sword and gets ready to go with Irina, Rias, Luffy and the others to see it wordlessly. "See you again," said Irina with enthusiasm. They both left, leaving Rias and the others, and then left Cow's school. Luffy saw that he just smiled happily at the thought of having a new friend. "It seems we will have new friends," Luffy said with a smile. "New friends? They are enemies," said Issei, trying to explain. "Then the enemy becomes a friend," said Luffy innocently. Issei only sweat dropped when he heard Luffy's words. "I don't understand you, Luffy," said Issei. Rias smiles to see Luffy, who is eager to make friends with them. He already realizes that Luffy is a very friendly person. Luffy called Rias. Luffy then sees Rias calling him. "What's up, Rias?" asked Luffy. "Later that night we will hunt for wild devils. Do you want to come along?" asked Rias. Luffy heard Rias talking about devils, just smiling. He thought that it would be nice. "Okay, I'm joining," Luffy said with a smile. Rias then smiles at Luffy's answer to go hunting for wild devils. "Is this okay, Butto?" asked Akino worriedly. "Just calm down, Akino, you already know the power of Luffy-kun," said Rias, telling Akino. Akino then understood Butto. She also wanted to see Luffy's action again against the wild devil. "Well, we'll leave tonight," said Rias, telling the peerage and Luffy. Rias's peerage then nods, understanding Rias's words, while Luffy just smiles impatiently for tonight. At another place. In another place in the human world, there are some places like fantasy places where there are villages and green trees in that place. But in a village there are those who have been attacked by monsters. Run away. Save yourself. How can there be so many monsters here? The voices of the residents were panicked when the monster destroyed several buildings in the village. The mosquitoes continued to destroy several buildings around it, such as houses, trees and others. What should we do? We can't beat them, said one resident. Damn, why should it be like this? The monsters seem to suddenly go berserk. Is there anything that makes them like that? I don't know either. The residents began to think about these monsters who were so wild, they didn't know what to do now. Quick, take women and children to hiding, said one resident. The residents then understood the words of one of the residents and then took the children and women to safety. TCH, after all we have to fight them. Correct. The men in the population then took several weapons that could be said to be weapons because most of them carried equipment for farming because they were mostly rice fields. Okay, go ahead all of you, one of the residents shouted boldly. The monsters then attacked the male population very fiercely, because the weapons of the population made them very little. The monsters continued to attack the other residents so that many were injured. But the residents continued to fight the monsters even though it was impossible. Damn, what should we do? There have been many people who have been injured, said one resident who was holding his injured stomach. No matter how strong they are, we must defeat them, said one resident who was still strong fighting. Even though the residents were still passionate about fighting, they still lost because their numbers lived a little to fight the monsters. The monsters then approached the hiding place of the children and women. Don't let them, one of the residents shouted. The children were crying in hiding places, and the women tried to calm the children not to cry. They hoped that there will be someone who will help them. When one of the monsters wanted to approach the hiding place, suddenly came a woman carrying a sword that directly attacked the monsters. Slash. A woman sound slashed into one of the monsters. The residents were again shocked because someone helped them. The monsters then see who the woman is cutting one of their friends. Seen a woman carrying a sword. The woman had silver hair wearing a helmet, she was wearing a silver armor which made her look dashing, and also she looked very beautiful and sexy. The residents were shocked. MRS Freya, shouted one resident who was happy because they would be saved. We are safe. Freya then smiled seeing the residents who were happy to see him come. Freya then looked at the monsters with a sharp look. How dare you hurt innocent residents, said Freya with eyes full of anger. The monsters then began to be frightened when they saw Freya's eyes filled with anger. They tried not to be afraid, but still they were afraid to see Freya. All right, I will annihilate you, said Freya, who then raised her sword to slash the monsters. Freya quickly attacked the monsters with a very fast speed that made the monsters unable to see the attack from Freya. Freya then slashed one by one the monsters mercilessly. The monsters couldn't do anything to fight the goddess of Asgard. Then most of the monsters then went to save themselves by running away from the village. The residents then began to calm down because many monsters had fled their villages. Finally Freya said while sheathed the sword. Great! Shouted the residents in the village who were now safe from the monsters that attacked their village. Are you okay? Asked Freya to the residents. Yes, we're fine, thank you, MRS Freya, said one resident. Freya then smiled at the residents, grateful that they were fine. Freya then intended to return to Asgard. Well, I'll go back to Asgard first, said Freya. The residents then nodded understanding. Freya then left the village. The residents saw Freya go away, just smiled thanking Freya. Looks like I'm feeling excited today, said Freya looking at the view while walking towards Asgard, which was not too far from the village. In another place. Elsewhere, there was a woman who was looking at a dark sky because it was night. The woman has long black hair characteristics, wears a kimono, and is looking at the stars in the sky. Amaterasu-sama, the hot water is ready, said one of the servants to Amaterasu. Why, thank you. Amaterasu then goes to her bathroom to bathe with hot water while looking at the stars in the dark sky, but there is a little light that is the moonlight. It's very beautiful, said Amaterasu, admiring the beautiful sky. Do you need anything else? Asked one of the servants. No, thank you, said Amaterasu. The servants then left Amaterasu to calm down when she bathed. Amaterasu then opened her kimono and put it to the side, then she went into the hot water pool which had been provided by her servant. Amaterasu was calming her mind, which seemed quite heavy because he thought of some problems that occurred in their territory. Because of feeling stress, Amaterasu then calmed his mind with a hot shower while looking at this beautiful night sky. "Why are there so many problems today?" said Amaterasu. When Amaterasu was enjoying the hot water, suddenly came a person who came near Amaterasu. Amaterasu just calmed down because she already knew that there was someone in her house. "What are you doing here?" asked Amaterasu while still seeing stars in the sky. "She knows me?" surprised that figure. "So are you going to answer my question or will I shoot you?" threatened Amaterasu. "Take it easy for the Shinto goddess, I come here peacefully," said the figure. That figure then showed himself to Amaterasu, and it turned out that this figure was a man wearing a black mask and robed all in black. "Introducing my name is Rex," Rex said, introducing himself. Amaterasu just stared at Rex with a bored look at hearing his not-so-special name. "So what do you want to come to, Rex?" Amaterasu asked. "Do you want to come here to peek at me?" asked Amaterasu again. No, of course not," said Rex, who was nervous as he was accused of seeing a red hue on Rex's cheeks when he saw Amaterasu's body soaking in hot water. "I'm only giving information here," Rex said. "Information?" Amaterasu then began to be interested in Rex's words. "Right, information about what will happen in the Shinto country," Rex said. Amaterasu was surprised to hear that this information would be related to her country. Amaterasu thought this would be great information. "Tell me," Amaterasu said firmly. Rex then smiled slyly as Amaterasu began to be interested in his information. "This information will make everyone in the Shinto country panic. About a human who will destroy this Shinto country." Amaterasu was shocked when he heard Rex's words about the destruction of his country by human hands. Destroyed by humans? Amaterasu was surprised to hear the words of Rex. "Correct. I do not believe in you," said Amaterasu, who did not believe the words of Rex. "If you don't believe it, you can see it in the human world," Rex said. "In the human world? Where?" asked Amaterasu. "In the city of Kao," Rex said. Amaterasu then was quite shocked by the words of Rex. Kao City felt familiar to him. "There is a place where a lot of devils roam. If you still don't believe it, doesn't matter to me." Rex then walked away from Amaterasu's house in a relaxed manner. Rex then turned to look at Amaterasu once more. Rex looked at Amaterasu's breasts and body in hot water once more and then left by disappearing with his black magic power. "What a nasty man," said Amaterasu. She saw Rex was once again looking at her body. She wonders why all the men in this world really like a sexy woman's body. But Amaterasu hasn't seen an innocent child, our hero. Amaterasu then thought about the words from Rex, who said that the Shinto Negri would be destroyed by a man. "I hope that it's not true," Amaterasu said while looking back at the beautiful night sky. In Bangsaen Private Vocational School, Iblis Leviathan. "Hey, I told you, the bathroom is there?" said a woman who wore glasses to a man. "Oh, I wonder why your house is so big," said the man. "Even though my house is big, it doesn't mean that it's a reason to say that you're not lost," said Sona angrily. "Hey, I'm not lost," said the man irritably while looking at Sona. "Yes, you're lost," said Sona again. The man just stared at Sona in annoyance at being accused of being lost. The man was wearing a green nightgown from Sona and the hair was the same color as his clothes. "It looks like the man is going to defecate while sleeping. Let me take you to the bathroom," said Sona. "No, let me go alone," said the man. "What? It's impossible. You remember when you got lost in a city in the underworld, huh?" said Sona angrily. "I'm not lost, I'm just walking," said the man, still thinking that he didn't feel lost. Sona just stared at the man with a look of disbelief. She had known the man long enough. "It's up to you," said Sona. "Hey, call the man." Sona then saw this man in front of him who was calling her. "Yes, what is up?" asked Sona. "You said last night there had been a fight, right?" the man asked. Right at my friend's wedding," said Sona. "Oh, if you can you tell me about who is fighting?" the man asked. "Only a human and a noble devil," said Sona. "Man, how can humans be here?" the man asked again. "I don't know, actually there has been a fight between ordinary devils and aristocratic devils, until that man comes." The man just stared at Sona with understanding eyes. So the point was that there were fights between devils, but then there were humans who came to that battle. Man suddenly just messed up my best friend's wedding party even though I was happy when the wedding was cancelled. The man suddenly ate the food of the guests, said Sona, explaining about Luffy. Oh, man is stupid? Said the man, who reminded him of someone. Right, said Sona. Is he a sword approacher? The man asked again. No, he's a fighter, said Sona. The man then felt disappointed when Sona said that a human was not a swordsman. Oh, I understand you are asking questions like that, because you are also a swordsman, right, said Sona, looking at the man. I see, I will challenge anyone who says that he is the greatest swordsman here, said the man with a smile. Sona just stared at the man with a nod of understanding. The person in front of her was also the approach of the sword whose skills were not normal. Well, I'll go to the bathroom again, said the man, who then proceeded back to the bathroom. Hey, wait, that's the kitchen. Sona then chases the man again with annoyance. Continued. End of chapter.